Thank you all for joining. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone, wherever you are tuning in from. And welcome to Eval Cafe. My name is John Akwete, and I'm the organizer for Eval Cafe here at the Evaluation Center at Western Michigan University, and I'll be your host for today. Though you are tuning in virtually, we would like to recognize that the Western Michigan University is located on land historically occupied by Ijawa, Odawi, and Boduwami nations. Please take a moment to acknowledge and honor this ancestral land of the Three Fire Confederacy and consider the sacred land of all indigenous people and their continuous presence, especially wherever you may be tuning in from. The Evaluation Cafe is a weekly series presented throughout the academic year that features guest speakers on a wide range of evaluation topics, as evident in all our presentations last semester, and has been taking place at the Evaluation Center since the early 1980s. Though this has been traditionally been a small in-person gathering that has been recorded and shared online, continuously from last semester, this spring 2022 speaker series, while some may be hybrid, all events will be open to the public to join online, regardless of location. For our second event this semester, we are so delighted to be joined by two distinguished guests, Aisha Roy, Rios, and Vinda Shankar. Dr. Rios is the founder and learning and change strategy at Coactive Change. In her role, she partnered with change agents working to dismantle systems of oppression and create a more just and liberatory future. She brings substantive knowledge and experience in ethnographically grounded, culturally responsive evaluation practice with an intersectionality lens. She relies on approaches and methodologies that center collective knowledge and collaboration, rather than solely relying on her knowledge and experience, because she believes that learning does not happen in isolation, but in partnership with those working in the field to advance social justice. What this looks like in practice is slow-paced, reflective, and non-contextual grounded learning, an evaluation project where she centered relationship and trust building and provide thought partnership, creative facilitation, and strategic guidance. She loves collaborating on interdisciplinary and intergenerational teams in a way that harnesses everyone's diverse knowledge and lived experiences. Her commitment to creating a more just world permeates her collaborative approach to everything from evaluation projects to her consulting partnerships. She believes in leveraging the power of different ways of knowing and being, from evaluations and anthropology to coalition building and community organizing to achieve a collective liberation. Dr. Royce is committed to serving a various leadership and organizing role, including as a co-facilitator of the American Evaluation Association local affiliate collaborative. She's also a member of the Denver Reimagine Police and Public Safety Task Force, grassroots organizer with Monday Mutual Aid. She's also a former co-chair of the abolition campaign of the Denver Democratic Socialists of America and the Political Education and Research Committee. She's also a former president of the Atlanta Area Evaluation Association. She's identified as a multiracial Black woman of color who is cisgendered, heterosexual, and able. She led lived experience of oppressions in a racialized body, combined with the privilege afforded through proximity to whiteness, has fostered a deep awareness of the way intersectional social identity and lived experience shaped our perspective under neoliberal white supremacy capitalism. Our second guest for today is Vida Shankar. She has been actively engaging with 14 since early childhood. Mathematics, the arts, living systems, and making sense of the systemic oppression that has been experienced and seen others experience through all of the above. Having been raised by a physician and a musician, she approaches the world, including her work, to end systemic oppression as an artist who sees the beauty of math as interconnected to the elegance of natural systems. While pursuing her BFA and BA in art history at the University of Michigan, Vida learned about consciousness rising and movement organizing through the Feminist Women's Union and Asian American Women's Journal. After working first at large white arts institutions and at large small Asian American and diasporic arts organization, she pursued a Master's of Art in Public Affairs with concentrations in nonprofit management and racial, class, and gender in global perspective. She went on to work at social service and social change organizations, both of which refined a burdened critiques of nonprofit industrial complex that was further sharpened through training from the Center for the Third World Organizing and Insight, Women of Color Against Violence. Vida recently completed a PhD in evaluation study using an intersectional paradigm. Her dissertation research bridged critical theories of systemic oppressions with system thinking to examine how racialized differences is disservicely and materially constructed in and through evaluation. She has since tried to put her dissertation result into practice, nurturing a critical traditions in evaluation that interrogate identity and articulate the processes that refine and disrupt oppressive power dynamic in the evaluation and racially stratified industry that uses her services and results. Specifically, she has engaged other evaluators from excluded and harmed groups in challenging the production of dominant narrative regarding social problems. She has been organizing Minnesota evaluators representing groups surviving ongoing displacement and depositions of an effort to build shared and wide collective power rather than compete with each other. And she has been researching and practicing ways to approach harm and healing that draws from indigenous, rational, spiritual, and ethical tradition. Vida is currently an independent and interdisciplinary evaluation practitioner, scholar, organizer, and activist, as well as co-chair of the American Evaluation Association DEI Working Group. For those who are new to Evaluation Cafe, we will typically have 30 to 40 minutes discussion or presentation followed by 15 to 20 minutes Q&A section. Our guest today has a different model, which I think will be very fantastic for those who are joining us today for the first time. So I'd like to hand over to our two distinguished guests to carry on from here. Thank you very much.
Thank you and welcome. I don't know, Aisha, if you want to say a few words before we get started. We're good? Okay, so we were going to, in the spirit of our topic and, you know, many of the sessions that we've been doing lately together and separately, we wanted to take a moment to pay attention to our mind, body, spirit, and hearts to prepare us, you know, frankly, for the hour ahead. And so feel free to keep your cameras on or off as you are comfortable. I will probably turn mine off for this session just so that I don't get distracted. But I'm still here, obviously. Okay, so if we could take a minute just to take a few deep cleansing breaths. And, you know, release any kind of energy that we may have brought into the space. We we won't necessarily get rid of the energy entirely. You'll have an opportunity to bring it into the discussion, but just a way to let go of it for a second. And with your eyes open or closed, just pay attention to your eyes and what you may see or not see, depending on you know, who you are and what your eyes you know, are up to right now, or you know, in other words, I'm not necessarily talking about the ability to see, but I'm talking about how your eyes feel. If they are dry, if they're wet, if they're itching. But you may also be paying attention to whether you see light or dark. And once you've given that a minute, if you could pay attention now to your ears. And in the same way, you know, we think about what we hear. And so do pay attention to what you may hear or not hear. You know, street noise or hums of machines in your space right now. But also our ears give us balance. And so we can think about, you know, what else are we experiencing through our ears? And once you've really sort of focused on those senses, we can incorporate more intentionally our nose and the sense of smell and the memories that may come up with smells, the feeling of air coming in and out of our nose. And then we can move to our mouths and pay attention to whether they are dry, constricted, think about the sense of taste. And once we've given that a moment, we'll move on to the rest of our bodies. And we won't go through a full body scan, just given the time, but do pay attention to where you may be feeling, again, tight or restricted, itchy, warm or cold, aches or pains. And whatever it is that you may be feeling, take the next minute or so to recognize what you may need to be fully present, or as fully possibly present for the next hour, knowing that we're still in the middle of a global pandemic. And even without the pandemic, we have multiple people and issues that need our attention. Give yourself permission to get what you need, if it's a glass of water or a blanket or whatever it may be, so that you're caring for your own self for the next 45 minutes or so, and hopefully the rest of the day. All right. As you feel ready, you can let us know that you're back. If you if you feel like it, and we'll get started pretty soon.
Thank you, Vidya. Always such a treat. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm so excited for this conversation. And we want to offer some kind of framing before we really dive in. As John shared, we're trying to do something a little different. So we're not following a traditional kind of presentation, one directional format here. We're actually trying to hold space for a conversation with you all, a conversation where we will be participating as well. And so at a very high level, what we want to do is create space to engage in dialogue with you all, to hold space, to collectively struggle through both learning and reflection. And one of the things that we want to say is that we know that many of you in this virtual space may not feel safe, whether that's in your bodies, your homes, your university, your workplaces. And so that means that not everyone has to share. Not everyone has to speak, and that's okay. And we recognize that in holding this space, we don't have mechanisms to support any trauma responses that might come up. And we don't have any mechanisms to support your safety, right? So if in the context of you making yourself vulnerable, there is some form of retaliation, harm, shaming, other abuses that arise. And so we're naming all of that so that you all can consent and make decisions about what you do and do not say. And something else that we noticed is that when we wrote the abstract, we actually didn't name care and courage specifically. It's implicit, right? And it's in the title. So it was interesting for us to notice that we really focused on like conflict and harm. And so, but we're saying that because we really want to start this conversation from a place of care, safety, and protection, because we believe that that's the starting place, the foundational place to have these conversations, and that we need to have that before we can launch into more like sticky, robust conversations about conflict and critique. So that's just something else we wanted to share with you. And with that, we're going to offer some framing around care, critique, and conflict, generative conflict. So one of the things that I'll start off by saying is that we believe that we're formed by our interdependencies, even though that's something that shows up in really different ways depending on who we are and our different identities and lived experiences. And we appreciate the Care Manifesto text, which calls on us to expand and multiply who we care for beyond nuclear family, beyond a lot of ways in which we're told like these are the people we should be caring for, and we should not be caring for people out there. And so that's one place we're coming from in holding this space.
Yeah, and similarly, we noticed that in our work within evaluation and also outside evaluation that we often hear that we should be less critical and more compassionate, and so those two things are kind of contraposed, right? And so when we engage in critique of oppressive narratives and practices and language, we'll hear things like, have some compassion, this person so-and-so does a lot of good for the work. And so we don't address, either past harms or, present harms, or the potential future harms by what may be happening right now. And Aisha and I, we've been working together now for about a year and talking before that. And so we both find this a really slippery slope in that there's something that is scary about naming the harm, in the moment. It feels like the disruption of comfort comes at the expense of ourselves as individuals, but us as a collective and as a movement, actually starting, I wouldn't say starting because I think we're already doing it, but fully, more fully living into our values, our anti-oppressive values.
And so we've been talking a lot about like what would it look like to hold both compassion and critique, right, together. And there's a really wonderful text, Beyond Survival, that came out just in 2020, so fairly recently, an edited volume on transformative justice, which is a really amazing text. I'm reading it with a good friend and colleague, Sarah Gill, who's on right now. And so one of the points they offer in that text is, there is transformative power, right, in interrogating ourselves, our work, our relationships, how we treat one another, and how we interact with the planet. But there's also a need for compassion, right, for ourselves and everyone else, because for those of us, especially, and for all of us, this is all like we're experiencing such tremendous trauma and violence on a daily basis. And for those of us who are engaged in movement organizing as well, it's really difficult work, right? If you're working within institutions like academia, government, trying to like change from within, that is really hard work, and it's so traumatizing. And so when we are engaging in all this difficult work, we should have compassion for one another and ourselves. But then also there's really powerful room and interrogating our practices, reflecting on them, being in relationship with people to say, oh my gosh, we just did this thing and this was really problematic. Let's talk about that and let's explore different ways of doing things differently in the future. And so that's why we feel it's so important to hold both. And it's dangerous if we give up critique, right?
Right. And so we were, Aisha and I, we've actually met like 7 years ago or something like that. I can't remember, but anyway, not in continuous touch the whole time. And so we've had outside work and then we've had inside, work together. But one of the ways that I was like, so Aisha and I both have this organizing piece of it that we share. And she has a lot of experience, especially lately with the mutual aid work that she's doing and the transformative justice work that she's doing. And so that's one big pillar, and you'll see some citations of that work. And then another angle that I feel like has influenced my engagement, which I'm starting to call the pedagogy of parenthood, is just our familial relationships, right? So how do we approach care and courage and critique and compassion? What do we learn about that in our family and household settings, and in raising another human being, and what kind of lessons are imparted? And so so we start to see a pattern where we see these narratives of this lone, courageous hero who has lots of usually individual and systemic privilege supporting them and protecting them. And so even if something goes wrong, right, which it will if you bring up the issues that we bring up, they may have familial wealth that they can rely on. They may have a partner who is employed in the for-profit sector in a corporate position that, they don't have to worry about losing health insurance or, blah, blah, blah. And so, in our other work, you can rely on the justice system. Some people can, although I would argue that nobody actually can, but some people can more than others. And so, so we were trying to think about, for, the rest of us, right, who don't have those sorts of protections and who are really vulnerable and risk our family's security by bringing up issues. How can we create systems and structures that will care for each other? So that's one of the things we're trying to do in Minnesota, is like very literally create a support system for people who speak up at work, who, like Aisha was saying, we have been retaliated against. And so, so that's one very kind of literal piece of it, but there's also the less tangible pieces of it, which I think we'll talk about a bit in the next few minutes, about how do we create maybe traditions or rites of passage, those kinds of cultural tools that have been designed to protect members of our collective, right? And enable us to act courageously in the face of conflict and critique. Do you want to, Aisha, do you want to introduce the?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So what we want to do with you today is share a practice called the Vimbas, which is something that Resmaa Menakem has offered. I learned this practice. I'm part of a Black women's somatics group who we spinned off from another group, a study group going through my grandmother's hands. And so we spinned off and have a meeting just organically on our own for a year. And so I've been practicing this with them for a long time. And so we want to offer this practice to you all today. And so, and again, the point is to start from creating space to talk about experiences of care and comfort and security and compassion as a starting place. And so for this exercise, we invite anyone who is up for turning their video on to do so if that feels okay to you. It'll support the Vimbas practice if you do, but if you don't feel comfortable, then that's okay as well. And so I'm going to just share the Vimbas exercise with you all briefly, and then we'll put them into the chat as well, so you can have these. But if you use them in the future, please cite Resmaa, because this is where the practice comes from. And so there's 3 roles in this practice. There's the person who's sharing, the sharer, and they're going to recall the experience. And we're going to ask you a question that asks you to recall a specific experience. So that's forthcoming. But the person who's sharing their experience, what we want you to do is, so much of what we share is verbal, right? But we really want you to lean into the Vimbas, which we'll articulate in a bit, but which is really about like tuning into your body and somatic experiences. And so the person who's sharing is doing this. And then the somatic witness is a person who is listening to the sharer with their entire body and noticing what's coming up for them, right? And noticing also the other person and their entirety as well. And then the observer, which will be the rest of the group, is the person who is so we will all be listening with our entire bodies as well. So similar to the somatic witness in that way, but then also noticing what's happening across the screen. So notice everyone else in the space as well. And so speak to the communal experience of the group. And then the Vimbas themselves, this is what we'll all refer to, or those of us who are up for speaking. V stands for vibes, which is like the overall vibe, embodied kind of sense of what you're experiencing. So it's energy, there may be like feel or texture to it. And then I is for images. So what images come to mind, if any? Meaning is what meaning are you ascribing to all of this? B for behavior is, what behavioral impulses come up for you? Do you want to just like duck and just cow? Like, do you want to run? Let's yell. Affect, so the emotional responses. And then sensations are any other bodily sensations that are coming up. So feeling tight, tingly, warmth, and so on. So I will pause to see if anyone has any questions about what the VIMBAs are and like how to articulate them and feel into them, and then what the roles are. Okay. So we need a volunteer to share, and then a volunteer to be the somatic witness, and then we will all be the observer as a collective. And I'll tell you the question that we're going to ask you. It's basically to share a vivid memory or memorable moment where you felt cared for, safe, secure, protected. And this could be anything from a younger age to the present moment to any aspects of your life. So very open, intentionally. And if folks are feeling a little nervous about volunteering, one thing that Vidya and I would like to offer is if one person was open to sharing, Vidya or I could model being the somatic witness, and then the group can collectively observe after, if there is someone who would be open to sharing. Oh, Lori, I see your hand.
I was really racking my brain because as a mother, I feel like this is my job to make other people feel cared for, safe, protected, and secure. So I was like, but it actually relates to motherhood. So, and maybe this is on my mind because our good colleague and friend, Kelly Robertson, is expecting a baby anytime now. But the moment that comes to mind was I was in labor at home with my first child and miserable. I had I had done the Bradley method of birth coaching and expected that I was going to be at home as long as possible and my husband was going to be my support and it was going to be this magical thing. And I was so miserable at home, just miserable. And I told my husband, I was like, okay, we're going to the hospital now. It was a pouring down rainstorm. So we got to the hospital and I got into the room and the nurses put me on the bed and tucked me in with pillows and got me just so. And that moment of was just this incredible relief that I was physically comfortable and I felt surrounded by people who knew what they were doing, had been through this many times and were going to take care of me. So I felt very safe. Nothing against my husband, but he, of course, neither of us had no idea what we were doing. So it was really a sense of relief, all those things. I felt safe. I was going to be taken care of. And I was in the hands of people who knew how to take care of me and knew what was going to happen and knew what to do. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. So let me ask you, as you're sharing that experience now and reflecting back, what vibes come up for you?
Like I feel the pillows against my back and just feel tucked in and snuggly and relaxed, even though I'm sure I was, in terrible pain. I felt like somehow responsibility and burden being lifted from me, that it was with somebody. I don't feel great about saying that right now, but with somebody else was there to sort of shepherd me through, and it wasn't on me to figure out what I should be doing and when. It was that there was, so I feel comfort, I guess it's the biggest thing. Relief and comfort.
What about the images?
All white, it's like, it's one of those birthing rooms, but white sheets, crisp, clean, white sheets. I think that's another thing, is just, I don't know how this fits in, but not being responsible for the space. Like, just like, I think that has to do with being cared for. Like, I don't have to worry about the space. It's perfect. It's clean. It's ready for me. And I just have to be in it and not have to worry about taking care of it.
And I heard a lot in what you were sharing around like the meaning this gave to you, but anything else on meaning?
I can't think of anything else right now. Just that relief and feeling comfort and safety and in safe, all that stuff that you're mentioning. But that's, I think, the best example I can think of. Again, for that was 18 and a half years ago, and now I feel like I'm the one to do that much more for other people. Not that I feel, I'm very fortunate. I don't have reason to feel unsafe in my daily life. So I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, the behavior I was hearing is that you wanting to provide that care and support for other people. For affect, any additional emotions that even now in telling the story that are coming up for you?
I think I was probably scared. So probably part of it was not feeling as scared. Again, it just comes back to people being around who were going to make sure I was okay. So being afraid and then not. I mean, I don't think that was a huge thing, but I'm sure I was very nervous and a little scared. So probably that sort of went away in large part. What was your prompt again? I feel like I'm rambling.
Oh, you're not. Yeah, the emotions like that are circulating.
I'm sure I was excited, but then it was just allowed me to focus on the thing I was doing instead of anything else. It took away worries, I guess. It's a lot of worries, and it made me able to focus on the one thing that I needed to do at the time.
And then bodily sensations, like
you don't want to know about that. You mean right now? I don't think I really feel any. I mean, so then of course I was in labor, so we won't go into that, but now I think what it invokes for me is the sense of getting, and it literally was, of getting in a really comfy, cozy bed, of like that, just like nesting and snuggling in safety.
I can model the somatic witness role. So in all that sharing, Lori, I mean, I really, in terms of sensations, I felt that coziness. I felt that warmth, which felt really good. I've had a really challenging, stressful, like traumatizing past week or so. And so like that felt really good. And the vibes are just so uplifting, and like watching, when you're telling the story, you're looking to the right and to the left, recalling, but like it was just like such a positivity and such like a really powerful energy. So I felt that. And I saw the white pillows too.
It's interesting though, because I very much hesitate to say this, because it's a beautiful memory, and and part of the somatic witness is about honoring the memory and cultivating, sort of conjuring that feeling of safety. That was what I was hoping to, Aisha and I were meeting right before, and I was really clear that part of my intention was to kind of remember those feelings of safety so that we can reclaim them when we don't feel safe. And yet hearing your birth story is hard for me as a woman of color who did not experience, I'm going to start crying, who did not experience any of that safety in the hospital, and who was greeted at the door. My husband was told to provide his ID when I was literally dripping water, and pregnant, right? And so I hesitated to say this, but I decided to say it because I think that this is how this works, right? In real life, that it's bringing up things in me. I'm feeling myself hot, right? I'm feeling my heart rate go up. I'm remembering when my baby was born. She was a preemie when she was born, and the nurse asking me if I smoked. Why is she so small? Did you smoke when I hadn't? And it was on record, right? I'm remembering all of those, all the issues with insurance, and it's, to me, it's just a microcosm, right, of how this happens in our daily lives, and how these systems that we rely on for safety are inequitably distributed, right? And yet, how I did have a hospital, to go to, and I did actually not have insurance, but that's another story. But how many Black women in particular die, right, in those very same circumstances. So.
Lydia, when you were talking, I felt a heaviness and just a sadness, and it doesn't take I think instead of taking away from that safety that I feel, it just brings all the more gratitude for the unearned privileges that I do have, that wasn't a thought it would have crossed my mind. So I'm, I don't say lucky, that's, but just it all the more grateful that I did have a place to go and feel safe and cared for.
Thanks. I appreciate hearing that, because I, like I said, I did have a mental kind of argument in my head about it.
No, I think it's so common, right, is for me not even to think about that. Like that's the point of privilege, right? You take it for granted.
I also had a similar tension as Vidya. I work in healthcare, and we're focusing right now on maternal infant health in our hospital and learning a lot about the experiences that some people have and not others. And so while I felt like I could listen to Lori's story and feel some of that happiness that she felt, I couldn't help but think about the tension that exists, and even beyond women and women of color dying in those situations, even just the women who don't die but have traumatic experiences in those situations, right? And what knock-on effects those have for people and how they seek care in the future.
when I was listening to the words, one thing that stood out to me, that's something I think a lot about these days, because I need to learn a lot about acting on this, is what we heard in the beginning about learning to expand our vision of who we care for. And with that on my mind, I really noticed in the story that the reluctance to accept care, and how arriving in that bed was almost, excuse me, I don't remember the exact words, and that's just really unfair. So I don't want to misrepresent it. But I remember hearing that, that the idea that how nice it was for someone else to be taking care of you, and that how that was such a shift. And I think such an important part of our culture, is how small our care world is, and that affects so many things, from our communities to our public policies. And yeah, that's something that's really on my mind a lot lately.
Yeah, and I noticed when you said that, Lori, something like that, I wasn't, all of a sudden I didn't have to be responsible. I was watching the group, and a lot of heads nodded in the group when you made that comment.
So what do we think allowed, Laura, you can answer first, or others can go. What do you think allowed for that feeling of safety?
That's an interesting question. An answer is not popping into my mind. I mean, personally, I think societally, we can talk about how, the healthcare system and being white and being privileged and all that. But in terms of my inner workings, maybe a little bit of letting go, to Sarah's point about feeling like you need to be responsible and take care of yourself, and you can handle this, and versus I can't really handle this, and it's okay to let go and let someone else take care of me. So a little bit of letting go maybe would be my best response. But that's very different personally than what allowed it, structurally and societally.
Yeah, that's a great distinction. Is and actually I think it was Mike who brought this up earlier too. So there's some level of individual agency and responsibility. Can we allow ourselves to be taken care of? But can we? I mean, there's some of us who are like, actually, I can't trust, right? So, and then there's, part of what Aisha and I definitely were thinking about was the institutional mechanisms, right? And structural mechanisms that what allowed you that feeling of safety. And, with the dream, I guess, of, how can we, recreate that feeling, in our own institutions for everyone, though, right? So in a way that is equitably distributed, right? And that doesn't have to be earned, right? Or unearned, but is available freely.
The theme that I'm hearing in both of your thoughts is the idea of trust. And it's certainly what I'm thinking of. Is I'm thinking how few situations there are in my world where I feel comfortable ceding control because I trust that I am safe. And so I think that's sort of maybe the universal. We do talk about building trust, but that's something I'd like to think more intentionally about. How do I do that? I mean, I think I do it sort of instinctively, but I don't know how to explain that to someone else. So I wonder if people have any thoughts about that, about intentionally building trust.
I think that's a huge Sally, the trust, because if you don't trust that people have your interests at heart, you're not going to say, oh, you can take care of me.
Yeah, and I think in particular when you're crossing a barrier of race or gender or religion, whatever things carry extra baggage for the people you're dealing with. Many years ago now, I was developing a minority teacher recruitment program and had the good fortune to sit down with one of the Black sororities just to talk about that. How do parents feel about this? What are some things that I should be thinking about? And I was a very young little thing, white girl in the South, and they were very gracious enough to explain to me that just my whiteness was a barrier that I would have to overcome, that they were taking a chance in even speaking to me about this and being candid about their experience when people come and say, we want more Black and brown people to be engaged in teaching. They've heard that before. Much has been asked and little has been given in return. So I'm just acknowledging that it happens on both sides of the race, gender, religion lines. We all have, right, historical, may hold strong or deeply implicit biases about other groups that are different from our own, and that's something to be really intentional about. And I other than in my personal life, I try to tackle that by building genuine relationships, not just ticking the box saying, oh, I had coffee with, my friend Gina, who is Latina. You know what I mean? It's really seeking common ground, common interests. If you don't have them, you don't have them. But that I know that on a personal level, so I don't quite know how to ratchet that up to more of a group or organizational level.
I think, Sally, you said, they had heard people say it before, we want more Black teachers or Hispanic teachers. And I mean, I think that's the key, is that, like, in some ways I feel like it has to the trust comes through the actions, right? And so, like, the idea is, like, how do we make, like, what actions can we as individuals or as institutions take to make sure that everyone has the experience that Lori had, right? And in doing that, we build or earn trust, right? And we can say all we want to say about, as institutions can say all they want to say about what they're committed to and what their values are, but if they don't uphold them through their actions, it's just bullshit.
Yeah, something else, Sally, you were saying, pinged for me, that's, in the intentionality of building relation with different people, right? Like, sometimes we tend to compartmentalize like where we do that and where we don't do that. And so I'm thinking about, workplaces and how, professional spaces, right? That's separate from like the personal and from people who we like really have deep relationships with and like share what's going on in our lives. That's really traumatizing and challenging. And so that separation, I'm thinking about how we can break that down, right? And like really build relationship with people and share with people and show care, expand who we are caring for, right? Beyond just like our immediate family and just like our friend circle. And even beyond that, right? Like if we're walking down the street and there's someone who is living outside, like how can we extend care to them, and not just pass by them? And so really expanding who we build trust with. And
are there any, I'm wondering, because you mentioned professional relationships, are there any sort of norms of what's appropriate in terms of professional relationships, how much we keep to ourselves versus not, that we need to attend to or get past in our professional lives? Because for many of us, depending on where we live, we may have little exposure to people who are different than we are, but at work, there's perhaps a better chance. So there's more opportunity to reach across those, those invisible lines. Just wondering if that's a factor to consider.
Yeah, and I think I thought it was very telling that you talked about ceding control, and I think that shows up differently depending on how we are embodied, right? Like and how we're read. I mean, how we identify and how we're read, and so I think that there's a lot of whiteness that is afraid, right, also to cede control. And that's where I think that this sort of cyclical relationship between care and courage kind of comes in. And I think Corey, some of what you were saying was about if we don't care, then we can't expect people to have the courage to trust, right? And so I think what's interesting for me about this, which Resmaa, talks about a lot, is that it's I don't want to suggest that it's even Steven, like that we have all internalized trauma, and we do all require more caring systems that will allow us the courage to cede control. And yet as we already saw, right, some people can rely on the systems that exist and some people can't. And so what I'm trying to rethink, and I definitely don't have it figured out, and that's why we do these things, right? So that we can collectively rethink is, do we want that? And this is a question, I don't know the answer. Do we actually want that kind of care for everyone? Or is it too embroiled in a carceral, oppressive way of approaching care, in terms of service delivery? Is there another way that we can think about the care that people deserve? That, like I said, Corey, you mentioned that trust is earned, and which I agree. I think I haven't contemplated enough, but I would like to think that care is not earned, right? That we are all deserving of care. And so evaluation, like healthcare, is built on this system where you earn, maybe, if you're lucky, you earn the respect, right, of care. So I know we're at time, so I will stop talking.
And we can hang a little bit more if you all are up for it, but we do want to acknowledge the time that we're at the hour. But yeah, let's keep talking if you all have the space for it. One thing I did want to say is that Vidya and I are in conversation about creating a cohort-based political education space And so if you want to stay in touch about that, I'll put our emails in the chat. Just let us know. And it's very much information, but it's an expansion of this. So here are our emails.
Vidya, you said something about your experience about being asked if you smoked, right? And you know, you also just mentioned this term carceral system of care, and I mean that really hit for me because in thinking about the care we provide, the care for people who have been designated as needing extra care. So people who get a social worker comes to their room after they have their baby, right? To presumably help them. But they're there because they flagged for THC positive. And so that interaction becomes one of conflict, not support. And I think that's where I link back to that sort of carceral system in a way that I don't think I have in the past. You know, I've heard the term, but like that really sort of put it together for me, because it feels like we create these situations where in our minds we think we're helping people, but in reality it's sort of a punishment, you know?
Yeah, the carceral logic is all about punishment, monitoring, controlling, and that, you know, of course manifests in the prison industrial complex, PIC, but across so many of our institutions. And it shows up in our interpersonal relationships. So it shows up in our work, you know, kind of carrot stick.
Right.
Yeah, or parenting. And there's a lot of paternalism wrapped up in that, right? And like believing that, okay, we know what's best for people. They need to change. If they change, then, you know, but if they don't, then we need to control, punish.
Isn't that in some ways what evaluation is all about? Like classically, about telling people they need to change or punishing them,
right,
in some sense for not doing as well as they could.
Right. A system of reward and punishment. Yes. If you met your outcomes and your goals, you get more funding, right? And the program continues. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So I'd like to thank our distinguished guests for today's discussion. It was really mind-blowing, and I had my own personal reflection on all the discussion. So I thank you all for joining for today. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Vidya and Aisha, can I make one more comment to you? It's fascinating to me, like when you first asked the prompt, I couldn't really think of anything. And then when Lori spoke, something came immediately to mind. And I don't know if that's what's you've observed in doing this with other groups, but just wonder about the sort of snowballing that this kind of thing can have in a group, where as more people speak and share, more memories come back to others. So
that's one reason that we thought about, we thought also that even if just one person goes, everyone will benefit. And so, yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks. Thanks, you too.